The alibi defense is a legal strategy used in criminal cases where the defendant claims that they were somewhere else at the time the crime was committed, thereby making it impossible for them to be the perpetrator. An alibi is essentially evidence that, if credible, exonerates the defendant by proving that they could not have committed the alleged offense. Definition of the alibi defense. An alibi defense asserts that the defendant was not at the scene of the crime when it occurred and therefore could not have committed the crime. The term alibi comes from the Latin word meaning elsewhere. The defense typically involves presenting evidence or testimony that places the defendant at a different location at the time the crime was committed. Legal requirements for an alibi defense. To successfully assert an alibi defense, several legal requirements must be met. 1. Notice requirement advance. Notification. Many jurisdictions require the defense to notify the prosecution in advance if they intend to use an alibi defense. This notification often includes details of the alleged alibi and the witnesses who will testify to support it. Timing. The notification must be provided within a specific time frame set by the court rules or statutes. 2. Credible evidence. Witness testimony. Testimony from individuals who can confirm the defendant's whereabouts at the relevant time. This could include family members, friends, co-workers, or any other credible witnesses. Documentation. Documentary evidence such as receipts, videos, GPS data, time-stamped photographs, or other records that can corroborate the defendant's alibi. Consistency. The alibi evidence must be consistent and credible, leaving little room for doubt about the defendant's location during the crime. 3. Cross-examination and verification. Cross-examination. The prosecution has the right to cross-examine alibi witnesses and challenge the credibility of the alibi evidence. Verification. The defense may need to support the alibi with additional evidence to verify its authenticity. Procedure for raising an alibi. Defense 1. Investigation. Gathering evidence. The defense attorney investigates the defendant's whereabouts at the time of the crime, gathering witnesses and collecting any documentary evidence that supports the alibi. 2. Notification to prosecution formal notice. The defense submits a formal notice of the alibi to the prosecution, including the names and addresses of alibi witnesses and details of the alibi evidence. 3. Pre-trial and discovery. Prosecution's investigation. The prosecution investigates the alibi, interviewing witnesses and examining documentary evidence to verify its validity. Depositions. Both parties may take depositions from alibi witnesses to obtain sworn testimony before the trial. 4. Presentation at trial defense's case. During the trial, the defense presents the alibi evidence and witnesses to establish that the defendant was not at the scene of the crime. Cross-examination. The prosecution cross-examines the alibi witnesses and presents any evidence that may refute the alibi. 5. Jury instructions. Burden of proof. The judge instructs the jury that the prosecution bears the burden of proving the defendant's guilt beyond a reasonable doubt, including disproving the alibi if raised. Implications of the alibi defense. 1. Exoneration. Successful alibi. If the alibi is credible and the jury finds it believable, it can lead to an acquittal, exonerating the defendant from the charges. 2. Challenge to credibility, weak alibi. If the alibi is weak, inconsistent, or not credible, it can harm the defendant's case, leading the jury to doubt the overall defense strategy. Perjury risks. If alibi witnesses are found to be lying, both the witnesses and the defendant may face perjury charges, significantly damaging the defense and potentially leading to a conviction. 3. Prosecution's strategy refutation. The prosecution will aim to refute the alibi by presenting evidence that places the defendant at the scene or by discrediting the alibi witnesses. Alternative explanations. The prosecution may provide alternative explanations or timelines that reconcile the alibi with the defendant's potential involvement in the crime. Advantages and disadvantages of the alibi defense advantages. Clear exoneration. A strong and credible alibi can conclusively prove the defendant's innocence. Shifts focus. Forces the prosecution to prove the defendant was at the crime scene, potentially weakening their case. Disadvantages. Burden of proof. While the prosecution carries the burden of proof, presenting an alibi requires thorough investigation and credible evidence. Risk of discrediting. An unconvincing alibi can lead to increased scrutiny and potential damage to the defense's credibility. Potential backfire. False alibi claims can result in additional charges, such as perjury or obstruction of justice.